Hi and welcome to a new video, and in today's video we will talk about the RTX 2080 Super, which just got released today, and luckily I had the chance to get this GIGABYTE RTX 2080 Super in the Windforce Cooler edition. It's also an OC edition, which means that it has a higher boost clock. We will test this card later, obviously, when it comes to performance, but obviously we will also take a closer look at the card itself, dismount the cooler, take a look at the PCB, voltage regulators and all of that. When it comes to the RTX 2080 Super, it's basically a full TU104 GPU. A lot of people online said that it's like a smaller version of the 2080 Ti, but it's not, because the 2080 Ti is using the TU102, which is a different GPU. The TU104, which is sitting on the RTX 2080 Super, now has 2 more RT cores and also has 128 more shaders. In addition, it also comes with a higher base frequency and higher boost clocks. So we will have higher performance, not only by the additional cores, but also because now this card has a higher base and boost clock. Obviously, also this one, because it's the OC edition, has a higher boost than the typical NVIDIA Founders Edition. The accessories of this card are very simple. We have this small box which obviously contains the driver, but you should just download the newest or latest driver from NVIDIA homepage. It also comes with this small manual or sticker where it says that you should register your card online within the first 30 days after purchase, and if you do that you will extend your warranty up to 4 years, which is something I can just recommend. If you're buying one of those cards, first thing you do, take your card and register your video card online. We will now unmount the cooler from the card. For unmounting, I'm using the iFixit Tech Toolkit, which is a really handy toolkit. I can just recommend that, especially if you want to open, for example, a notebook and want to replace your thermal paste. All the necessary opening tools are included, or if you want to do a volt mod and need pliers, tweezers, all of that is included in the toolkit. What's the most important for me is this box, where it comes with a screwdriver with all the different bits you need for example, for unmounting a cooler from an NVIDIA graphics card. Especially the Founders Edition requires so many different bits, and all of those different bits are included in the iFixit Tech Toolkit. You will find more information in the link down below. The GIGABYTE RTX 2080 Super Gaming OC comes with the Windforce cooler. That's a cooler GIGABYTE has been using for a very long time. You will probably recognize the design with those 3 fans, and they're spinning in alternating directions, which leads to a very good cooling performance, especially if we compare that to the NVIDIA Founders Edition. This card runs at a lower RPM, in my test around 1200 to 1300 RPM, while it stays at a maximum of about 65 degrees Celsius, and my Founders Edition was at about 2000 RPM and about 70 degrees Celsius. So this cooler is really better than the NVIDIA Founders Edition. And what I personally like the most about this design is that the fans are passive and idle. The fans will only spin if the card exceeds about 48-49 degrees Celsius. Then that's the point where the fans start to spin, and unless the fans or the cooler is hitting this temperature, it will not rotate in idle, so it means it's completely silent if you're just browsing in Windows. Unmounting the card is a lot easier than with NVIDIA's Founders Edition. We have those 4 big screws for the cooler and 3 smaller ones in addition to the side. Taking a look at the backside of the cooler, we can see 6 heat pipes in total, which have direct contact to the GPU over conventional thermal paste. I think this part here surrounding the heat pipes should be aluminum. That's why I would not recommend to use liquid metal thermal compound if you want to tune your card, because if that's aluminum, I'm pretty sure it is, then you could have problems with corrosion with liquid metal. So if you want to do something, or if you have to replace your thermal paste, just use conventional thermal paste. Those pads surrounding this plate here are the contact to the memory chips of the VGA. and all the area behind here is just for VRM. So those pads are connecting to the chokes. This is for some of the capacitors. Those go to the MOSFETs, and those go also to some capacitors in addition. What I really like about the design is you see those small cutouts inside the cooler, which shows that GIGABYTE is really trying very hard to use as much space as possible, to use very much surface area for the best cooling, so they're not wasting any kind of space behind here in the section. They're just cutting out all the spaces for the components, but use as much surface area as possible. The shroud of the cooler is completely in plastic. It can also be removed. It also contains and holds down the fans. You can replace those fans if necessary. You can unmount them individually. So if one of the fans would fail, then you can unmount the single fan and replace it. They're quite easy to find, especially because those OC WindForce fans have been around for a very long time. It's quite easy and simple to find them on eBay. The GIGABYTE logo on here is RGB illuminated, so you can change the color of the GIGABYTE logo. Before we take a closer look at the PCB itself, we will unmount the backplate, which is held in place just by 3 screws. That's a lot more convenient than with the NVIDIA's Founders Edition. If I counted correctly, we have 10 screws in total for cooler and backplate combined. I think that's, for the NVIDIA Founders Edition, we already have 10 screws just to hold the backplate in place. Especially if you're using a big air cooling unit. I've seen it multiple times over the years that some people would have contact with those components in the air cooler, rip off some of the caps, damage the card permanently. A backplate will protect your card from those kind of damages. And this is a metal backplate, so it can also help with heat dissipation, and that's why GIGABYTE decided to place thermal pads on the memory backside and also on the VRM backside right here. The cool thing about backplates is that they're not only capable of dissipating the heat themselves, so it's a piece of metal that acts like a heatsink, but it also helps to spread the heat itself across the PCB. What happens, for example, could be that you have a hotspot right here of the VRM, and then this thick thermal pad in combination with the backplate will spread the heat down to the bottom part of the PCB and then dissipate some additional heat across the PCB. And that's one very big and important point of backplates. The PCB of the GIGABYTE RTX 2080 Super Gaming OC is very similar to the Founders Edition or reference design from the RTX 2080 from NVIDIA. You can just see that it's a GIGABYTE card by looking at the markings of the PCB. All those C whatever markings when it comes to small capacitors, and all the other markings are usually not there when it comes to a different vendor's card. That's how you can easily spot a GIGABYTE PCB. Looking at the VRM, we also have a 6+2 phase design for the RTX 2080 Super. 8 phases to the GPU, we have 2 phases to the memory. The phases over here are for like a 1.8 volt. I think the one on the bottom is for the USB Type-C connector, which is sitting here in front. Then we have 3 different shunt resistors, which are for measuring the power consumption over the 6-pin, 8-pin, and over the PCI Express connector. Those small ICs right here are the power shifters. Over those power shifters, the card can decide and control where the power comes from. For example, the card could decide that all the power has to go over the 8-pin connector, or that it goes completely over the PCI Express connector, which would never happen typically, but it can also completely disable the power delivery from the PCI Express connector to the phases. That's what the power shifters on this card are for. The rest of the design is just completely identical to the RTX 2080 Founders Edition. Taking a quick look at the benchmarks I could produce in the short time I compared the RTX 2080 Super versus the RTX 2080 Founders Edition and the TI Founders Edition. In Far Cry 5 I used 1440p with Ultra preset, and you can see the 2080 Super performs about 5 to 6 or 7% faster than the RTX 2080 Founders Edition. We have 3 FPS more in the 1% low, and we have 3 FPS more in average FPS. Looking at GTA 5, also here the RTX Super performed about 5 to 7% faster than the RTX 2080, with 2 FPS more in the 1% low and 4 FPS more in the average FPS. Obviously, RTX 2080 Ti is still a lot faster. The RTX 2080 gaming OC from GIGABYTE is a good successor for the RTX 2080 non-Super. The Super card obviously is faster, which comes from the higher boost clock, also from the more cores the GPU has. Looking at this card specifically, I can recommend this over a Founders Edition just by the fact that it's lighter, so it will sag less. Also, the cooler is a lot better. It's semi-passive in idle. The fans will not spin in idle, and the cooling performance is better with a temperature target of around 65 degrees Celsius, while the fans stay at about 1200 RPM, which is really a good thing in my opinion. If I was placing it in my system, I could not really hear it having a headset on while gaming. That's why I would absolutely recommend this card over a Founders Edition. So much about the RTX 2080 Super Gaming OC from GIGABYTE. I hope you enjoyed this video. See you soon.